Harvey Kirk, Lloyd Robertson, with the CTV National News.
Good evening, Lloyd. We'll be back tomorrow. U.S. presidential candidate Jesse Jackson may soon give his political campaign a big boost, some 10,000 kilometers from home. Jackson is in Damascus, trying to secure the release of captured American airman Robert Goodman. The Syrians haven't said much, but now they're telling Jackson to stick around, because something may happen. We have more in this report from Bob Faw.
Jackson's mission hasn't succeeded yet, but there are signs that it might. And tonight, when the Syrian government said it couldn't finish discussing Jackson's appeal and asked Jackson to delay his departure and stay a little longer, a spokesman said Jackson readily agreed.
President Assad has currently convened the appropriate leadership, and our appeal is being deliberated upon. These deliberations are signs of hope.
Still, what Jackson learned today is that it's easier to bargain with Syria's merchants than with the country's president, Hafiz Assad. In a private session which the Syrian strongman rarely grants and which lasted almost 90 minutes, Jackson argued for Goodman's release on humanitarian grounds. He also told Assad that he thinks there's a growing consensus in the U.S. to pull American Marines out of Lebanon and that he thinks President Reagan will lose the election. Afterwards, the normally outspoken candidate said the situation now is so delicate, even he is refraining from discussing it or the Assad meeting.
We are at a very sensitive stage in this appeal. Because of that, I will not entertain any questions and answers after this, because we do not want anything to be said out of context that would have some bearing upon a final decision.
When Jackson returned from the meeting, his Secret Service bodyguards were relieved to see him because for nearly 2 hours they had had no idea where Jackson had been taken. Assad's bodyguards had ordered the American agents to stay behind. Despite their angry objections, Jackson concurred. It's possible, of course, that Assad is just stringing Jackson along, but he did tell Jackson that appropriate government officials here would consider changing Syrian policy, which is that before Goodman leaves, U.S. reconnaissance flights over Lebanon must cease. So he's staying, and yes, he really does believe he can pull it off. And if all that seems outlandish, 1 week ago, just getting here, much less seeing both Assad and Goodman, seemed pretty outlandish too. Bob Fall, CBS News, with the Jackson campaign in Damascus.
Jordan's King Hussein said today he may begin key talks soon with PLO Chief Yasser Arafat over a future Palestinian homeland. Those talks have been encouraged by the United States, but the agenda won't include President Reagan's peace plan. It calls for a Palestinian entity on the Israeli-occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Arafat once again today rejected the Reagan plan. He vowed instead to continue armed struggle. Arafat has been under fire from PLO radicals for being too soft on Israel. France announced today that it will pull 1/4 of its peacekeeping troops out of Beirut. That's about 500 men. They will be redeployed to safer positions with United Nations forces in southern Lebanon. Over 80 French soldiers have been killed so far. The French pullout comes after Italy's announcement to cut its peacekeeping contingent by half. All this puts even more pressure on the U.S. to do the same. In France, special police squads are riding the country's high-speed trains and patrolling the railway stations. They're trying to prevent a repetition of the New Year's Eve terrorist bombings, which killed 5 people and injured 40 more. 2 died at the railway station in Marseille when a bomb went off in a baggage locker. 3 more were killed after another bomb exploded in a luggage rack of the Marseille to Paris express train. There has been a string of contradictory claims of responsibility for the bombs. The latest one purportedly comes from an Arab extremist group, which had links with the notorious terrorist Carlos. 2 Spanish national policemen were machine-gunned to death today in an unexplained act of terrorism. The officers were on patrol in a suburb of Madrid when their car was riddled with bullets. Witnesses said the patrol car slowed down when a woman hailed it. Then 3 men appeared from cover, one of them firing a machine gun. The 4 made their escape on foot. The area was sealed off, but a house-to-house search failed to locate the killers. Either an anti-fascist resistance group or Basque separatists are thought responsible. The American-backed government in El Salvador is trying to cope with the fallout from 2 humiliating defeats at the hands of leftist guerrillas. On the eve of the new year, the rebels overran the government's newest army fort. And on New Year's Day, they destroyed the country's most important and heavily defended bridge. We have more on that story from Michael Connor.
It used to be the most important and the most heavily defended bridge in the country, until yesterday, when rebels forced government troops away and then used mortars to send the span to where it rests now. Without the bridge, it will be even more difficult for the Army to defend the eastern third of the country, and that is where the rebels are the strongest. This is the second important defeat for the government of El Salvador. Here, in the northern province of Chalatenango, the Army's newest fort was sacked by rebels on Friday. Most of what rebels left behind was destroyed by the Army in retaking the fort. The day before that attack, the Army was boasting to reporters that 80% of its troops were in the field searching for guerrillas. But after rebels hit the garrison, the Army set up roadblocks to try to keep reporters away from the area. These government soldiers, taken prisoner by the rebels, say they were caught completely by surprise. This man said he was asleep when the first thing he knew, there were mortars and grenades coming over the walls. Others said they didn't know a large rebel force was even close to the barracks. 2 colonels were among the government troops killed, and rebels claimed to have taken at least 100 prisoners. Aside from the psychological defeat both attacks represent, the raid on the barracks brought rebels a substantial increase in supplies. After the raid, they tried out their new weapons, distributed the fresh ammunition, monitored government communications on Army radios, and put on their brand new uniforms. Mike O'Connor, CBS News, Chalatenango Province, El Salvador.
The man Americans claim is behind the rebel insurgency in El Salvador, Fidel Castro, is celebrating the 25th anniversary of his rise to power this week. And he insisted once again that the American charges are lies. Ed Rabel prepared this report on the continuing feud between Washington and Havana.
Look at him. The world over, he is unmistakable. The beard, the olive green uniform, the animated speeches. Here he is, a quarter of a century after taking power, still proclaiming the virtues of his revolution, still denouncing the United States government.
The United States will have to resign itself to coexisting in this hemisphere with different social and economic systems and independent countries.
For years, Fidel Castro has been a thorn in America's pride. It was not always so. When he rode into Havana triumphantly after Cuba's dictator Fulgencio Batista fled the country, Americans called Castro the Robin Hood of the Caribbean.
Good evening, Fidel Castro.
Maybe you remember, a month after taking over, he appeared on American TV from his Havana hotel suite dressed in pajamas and tried to put Americans at ease.
Tell me, Fidel Castro, are you concerned at all about the communist influence in Cuba?
Oh, I am no worry because really there is not threat about communism here in Cuba.
Now, 25 years later, Castro is an avowed communist, a major ally of the Soviet Union, deeply dependent on billions in Soviet aid. But this also must be said. For 25 years, Fidel Castro and his revolution have survived the implacable hostility of the most powerful nation on earth. Survived the United States-sponsored Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. Survived the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Survived the American trade embargo, which began in 1962. And survived repeated assassination attempts by the CIA. How is it possible that he survived all this?
He has extraordinarily good intuition in crisis situations, trying to size up his enemy and trying to take, at the same time, bold actions. He has projected the power of a tiny country on the world stage.
Of Castro's personal hold on millions of Cubans, there can be no doubt. But the Fidel Castro today is not quite the same man who came down from the mountains 25 years ago.
He is more of a team player, a bit of an elder statesman, less likely to rush forward into something without having thought it through.
It might be said that Fidel Castro, the dictator, has grown in office, and for better or worse, there is no longer much doubt that the system he created will itself survive long after this extraordinary man passes into history. Ed Rabel, CBS News, Santiago, Cuba.
The Soviet Union began tying wages to productivity in some sectors of industry today. It's an experiment limited to a few heavy machinery and electrical plants. But if it works, it'll be expanded. It's part of Soviet President Yuri Andropov's campaign to prod his country's sluggish economy into improved performance. Workers who exceed production quotas will be eligible for bonuses of up to 10% of their regular wages. This new year is the year of the mouse in China, but the leaders in Peking are ignoring that omen. They said today they're ready to put some bite into their long-planned crackdown on corruption and influence peddling. Officially, it's called a party consolidation. It warns officials not to use their influence to obtain good housing or other perks. And it says officials who cause serious economic loss through red tape or incompetence will be punished. Nigeria's new military ruler announced a crackdown on government corruption today. General Muhammad Buhari said he'll jail crooked civil servants without, as he put it, the nonsense of legal proceedings. 3 days after the bloodless coup, Nigeria remains all but cut off from the rest of the world, except for radio reports. Steve Shepard prepared this report on the coup and its causes.
Nigeria is the biggest, richest, and most powerful nation in Black Africa. Just last August, civilian President Shehu Shagari was reelected to a second four-year term in office. But if Nigeria's politics have seemed healthy, its economy has not. Nigeria lives by exporting oil, and the world oil glut has hurt it badly. Since 1980, its oil exports have decreased by more than 50%. Its treasury has been hemorrhaging, its debt on the rise. Nigeria today owes foreign creditors more than $14 billion. Unemployment is rampant. Civil servants have been going without pay. Last year, in an effort to deal with rising discontent, President Shagari expelled some 1.7 million Ghanaians who had been brought into Nigeria as workers, but began competing with locals for jobs as the economy started to decline. And last week, Shagari announced a new austerity budget, which would have cut food subsidies and other government programs. That apparently was too much for the military, whose leaders believed Nigerian civilian rulers were not just incompetent, but corrupt. It overthrew Shagari and promised to clean up the government. Nigeria's new leader, General Muhammad Buhari, is known to Western observers. He is considered intelligent, conservative, and free from corruption, a Western-oriented pragmatist. Steve Shepard, ABC News, the State Department.
Poland's premier has compared his country as it is now and as it was before he banned the union's solidarity. General Wojciech Jaruzelski said, "I prefer limping forward to a gallop backward." Jaruzelski made the statement in a televised New Year's interview. He said if he hadn't declared martial law, Poland would have been in a state of war. Jaruzelski said some people may think him a dictator, but Poland is moving slowly to a brighter future. Inflation in Poland is still running at over 20%. Lech Wałęsa, Solidarity's founder, had a New Year's interview published in Vienna today. He called on the United States to lift economic sanctions against Poland. Wałęsa said the restrictions have fulfilled their task. South Africa today claimed some tactical gains from weekend fighting in Angola. It said it lost only 5 men, while the Southwest Africa People's Organization had 61 killed. The South African attack on southern Angola began a month ago. On the weekend, it pounded SWAPO positions with airstrikes and artillery fire. An explosion ripped through a plastics factory in Barrie, Ontario this evening. 3 people were injured, 2 of them seriously. 13 workers were in the building when the explosion happened. The blast destroyed a wall but did not spark a fire. One of the injured, a woman, was rushed 75 kilometers to a burns unit at a Toronto hospital. One of the other injured was said to be in serious condition with second-degree burns. The third injured worker was treated in hospital and released. The cause of the explosion is being investigated. After almost 3 weeks of bone-chilling cold, much of North America got a heartwarming break today. Temperatures in many places climbed above normal for this time of year. Sunshine predominated in Southern California, but there were high winds in San Diego County. A young boy escaped injury when a eucalyptus tree toppled on a house. Winds gusted up to 50 miles an hour as a light plane came in for a shaky but safe landing. The plane fared better than the local seagulls, though, which made little headway against the strong winds.